Well, hello there, and welcome to what many people are calling the greatest show ever. Yeah. So there's this video going around of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, I believe his name is, just having a total meltdown about Republican criticism of the military's use of critical race theory to train its troops. It's a very interesting video. It's revealing not just of what General Milley thinks or what the military thinks, but about how the conversation about critical race theory is going now in America. Let's take a look.
On the issue of critical race theory, et cetera, I'll obviously have to get much smarter on whatever the theory is. But I do think it's important, actually, for those of us in uniform to be open-minded and be widely read. And the United States Military Academy is a university. And it is important that we train and we understand.
Okay. So first of all, he says that it's important for the military to be well read. And yeah, of course, the military should be well read. You can read whatever you want. That's not the issue here, and it's very obvious that's the issue here. And he's kind of being disingenuous by just being like, "Oh, the military should be well read and read all of the things." This is not about what the military is reading. This is about what the military is doing to its people.
I have received several hundred whistleblower complaints. Again, this is just a few examples. An airman told us their unit was forced into a racist exercise called a privilege walk, where members of the wing were ordered to separate themselves by race and gender in order to stratify people based on their perceived privilege. One African-American officer disparagingly said, and I quote, "The Navy thinks my only value is as a black woman, and not the fact that she is a highly trained military specialist." One Marine told us that a military history training session was replaced with mandatory training on police brutality, white privilege, and systemic racism.
When liberals, ask people who study critical race theory, what it's all about, they usually get, the explanation that critical race theory is about studying racism in America, and they completely leave out the practical critical race theory, which has become known today to many people as DEI training, which stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Training. It's been going on in the military, it's been going on in corporations, it's been going on in bureaucracies, and that is another matter entirely. This is where they try to exorcise, if that's the word, where they try to get the whiteness out of white people, where they try to take white people and change their brains and rewire their brains into not being so racist. Because according to critical race theory, all white people are racist. And they say this openly. This is not like a conspiracy. They say openly, all white people are racist.
All white people are racist. So I put this up because I really want any white person in the room to know up front that this is what we're dealing with, that it's not going to be this coddling of white tears and what that looks like. We're not going to discuss, maybe some of us have worked it out. No, you're always going to be racist, actually. So even when you're on your path to trying to figure out how to be a better human being, because I believe that white people are born into not being human.
And then they explain this. What does that mean? Well, all white people are born into a racist society, and they benefit from that racist society, and if they don't oppose that racist society, then they are racist. That's what they say.
The challenge I want to offer my fellow white people is changing the question from if to how. So dominant culture asks if I'm racist. And I want to change that question to how have I been shaped by the forces of racism? How is racism manifesting in my life?
So during these DEI trainings, they try to rewire the brains of white people and even non-white people, even, Latino or Asian people who don't really fit in their boxes. Today, critical race theory has become very popular because it seeks to explain a simple question. The question is, why is it that after America decided to go completely colorblind and reject racism in the 60s, now, 50 years later, there are still huge disparities between black and white people? If you're a liberal and you believe that the only reason why a black person would be poor is because of racism, then you say, well, it must be that in the 60s we did not, in fact, get rid of racism. And if black people are still poor and are still not doing so well, it must be because there's still racism in America that's still powerful and pervasive. And so they set off, like detectives, to find the racism. They search, and they can't find much racism. And so they've decided that the racism in America is actually even deeper than they thought. It's mystical, it's spiritual, it's embedded in the minds of white people, and it needs to be yanked out and washed out through therapy, through intense training sessions, through racial interrogations, and all that fun stuff. That is the practical side of critical race theory that everyone seems to be ignoring. And these training sessions are really bad. Really bad. It's very traumatizing, it's very emotional, it's very deep, and they really do a lot of damage. They try to force people to feel deep shame and guilt about being white. They force people to try to stand up and admit to everyone that they are racist. They do all kinds of nasty stuff in these training sessions. And of course, they segregate these training sessions. So, thank you, critical race theory, for bringing back segregation. Then he says he wants to understand white rage. And then he mentions that he's a white man himself, actually.
And I want to understand white rage, and I'm white, and I want to understand it.
This is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, folks. This is the guy who's making the strategies to keep our country safe. And it's pretty disturbing,
So what is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building?
So he wants to understand what happened on January the 1st during the Capitol riots, and he's going to do that by studying critical race theory. He, like many others in the liberal establishment, and I don't know that he's a liberal, I'm just assuming that he's a liberal based on this video, they seem to have just come to the conclusion, based on absolutely nothing, that what happened on January the 1st was a racist thing, that it was about race, about white rage or whatever. Is there any data to suggest this? Is there a shred of evidence that what happened on January the 1st had anything to do with white rage or racism or anything race-related? Anything? Did they study the issue? No. They just decided that it was obviously about race. It was just an assumption that they made based on absolutely nothing. And now based on this assumption, they're going to use critical race theory to understand that racism that they decided exists and caused this riot. So, go figure.
What is it that caused thousands of people to assault this building and try to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America? What caused that?
This is very interesting. He's going to use critical race theory to understand why people tried to overturn the Constitution of the United States of America, because he wants to defend the Constitution of the United States of America. So he's going to use critical race theory to defend the Constitution. Clearly this man does not know what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is as anti-constitution as it gets. This is actually an interesting thing, because this is a problem that liberals have been having for a while. The more mainstream establishment liberals, they want to have it both ways. On the one hand, they want to profess their love for the Constitution and be all patriotic, and at the same time, they want to, stand with the left in criticizing and attacking America. Since the 60s, liberals have been saying, oh, we love America, we're totally patriotic. How dare you accuse me of not being patriotic? But also, America is an evil, imperialistic, capitalistic society that pales in comparison to this great Soviet Union or whatever. It's an old issue. You can't have it both ways. You can criticize America all you want, but you cannot attack it as fundamentally evil and then still be patriotic. That doesn't work. And that is exactly what critical race theory says. Critical race theory says America is systemically racist. And since being racist is evil, America is systemically evil. You can't say America is systemically evil and then profess your love for the Constitution. It does not work that way.
I want to find that out. I want to maintain an open mind here, and I do want to analyze it. It's important that we understand that, because our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, they come from the American people. So it is important that the leaders, now and in the future, do understand it.
So then he says that the people, the soldiers and the Marines and the sailors or whatever, they come from the American people, and therefore you have to study critical race theory. But when he says they come from the American people, it doesn't sound like he's saying that as a compliment. It's kind of like he's saying, well, actually, it turns out that, our troops are also one of those, crazy nut jobs. So, we really have to look into this. It's not a good look. It's not. And this whole campaign by, Biden's Pentagon, that they're going to, get rid of extremism in the ranks or whatever, and get rid of racism in the military, is very degrading to, the people who sign up to the military. It's very insulting. What makes them think that the military is full of racists? Seriously.
I've read Mao Zedong. I've read Karl Marx. I've read Lenin. That doesn't make me a communist. So what is wrong with understanding?
What is he saying here? What does this even mean? Is he saying that he reads critical race theory, doesn't believe in critical race theory? Is that what he's saying? What is... Nobody has a problem if he just reads books about critical race theory, if he doesn't actually believe in it. Just like nobody has a problem with him reading Marx or Lenin or whatever he wants to read. Our problem is implementing critical race theory in the military and in schools and in all kinds of stuff. Again, this is one of the big misconceptions and deceptions that's being put forward about critical race theory. Not just in the military, but with regards to elementary schools and the bans on critical race theory in elementary schools that have been going on in Republican states.
I'm getting ready to go back to school in the fall, and my governor has put into place some ridiculous legislation, such as I can't teach anything divisive, I can't teach critical race theory, and I can't teach about racial equity. This is at all public schools, colleges, and universities.
A lot of people are saying, why are we putting restrictions on what people are allowed to teach? People should know things. Is that not right? Shouldn't we know a lot of things? Well, of course we should study these things. We should know a lot of things. But critical race theory is not about studying it. It's about practicing it. As they themselves say, critical race theory is not a study. It's a practice. You don't just study critical race theory like it's a math textbook. You live critical race theory. They train you with critical race theory. They try to change your brains with critical race theory. They try to influence you with critical race theory. And as we're clearly seeing in the military, that's exactly what they're doing. They're using critical race theory to try to change people and to re-educate them, so to speak.
And I personally find it offensive that we are accusing the United States military, our general officers, our commissioned, non-commissioned officers, of being, quote, woke or something else because we're studying some theories that are out there.
So he's insulted. He's offended. How dare Republicans accuse the military of being woke? Incidentally, he hasn't mentioned anything about Ilhan Omar saying that the military was committing crimes against humanity, and she compared the U.S. military to Al-Qaeda, so he hasn't said anything about that. But how dare Republicans accuse him of being woke? The military is woke. Everyone knows it. It's very clear that woke stuff has been happening in the military. A high-ranking officer in the Space Force wrote a whole book about critical race theory in the military, and then was relieved of his command. It's woke. I mean, come on. Let's be serious here.
That was started at Harvard Law School years ago, and it proposed that there were laws in the United States, antebellum laws prior to the Civil War, that led to a power differential with African Americans that were 3/4 of a human being when this country was formed. And then we had a Civil War and Emancipation Proclamation to change it.
His outrage is pretty hilarious. He clearly doesn't know what he's talking about.
And we brought it up to the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It took another 100 years to change that. So look it, I do want to know. And I respect your service, and you and I are both Green Berets. But I want to know. And it matters to our military and the discipline and cohesion of this military.
So now he tries to define critical race theory. He tries to tell you exactly what it is, and he repeats exactly what's being written in the media these days about critical race theory. Of course, what they're writing about critical race theory is an attempt to try to, sanitize it and make it look totally normal. He says that critical race theory is the study of slavery, of antebellum laws, and about segregation, and about, the racism in American history. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. It's not like we didn't know about slavery and segregation before critical race theory came along. That's not what critical race theory is. It may be included in what critical race theory does, but that's not what critical race theory is. Everyone knows that. A whole bunch of years ago, cultural Marxist philosophers introduced us the idea of false consciousness. False consciousness means that the American people are so abused and so oppressed that they don't even know that they're abused and oppressed. We all are victims of false consciousness. We don't even see how oppressed we are. Amazing. Now, interestingly, in the 60s, white students loved this idea because it meant that they were victims. It meant that, we're all, totally victims and oppressed. But as you can imagine, the black students at the time were not too happy about this because, they were actually being oppressed, and they weren't too happy about white students being like, oh, we're also oppressed. Yeah, totally. Anyway, so critical race theory and, the other theories that are in that area is all about developing critical consciousness. Critical consciousness being the opposite of the false consciousness. Critical consciousness means you break free from the brainwashing and see the oppression of American society and see the evil of American society. That's what critical race theory is all about. It's about exposing American society for what it really is, evil and racist. And if that's what the Joint Chiefs of the And if that's what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of, and if that's what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is endorsing, then what is he fighting for exactly? The military is going to fight for evil, racist country. The purpose of critical race theory is to dismantle American society. They're pretty clear on that. If you guys saw what a mess this place was. Anyway, so it uses, the anecdotal evidence of racism in America to paint the entirety of America as racist and irredeemable. As far as the military goes, I have some questions about this whole critical race theory thing. In a corporation, for example, when they practice critical race theory, they'll, set, diversity goals. Well, they'll put these quotas of, black people or whatever for jobs. If there's a board of a bunch of people, they'll say, well, you have to have at least, 5 black people or whatever the number is. How does that work on a battlefield? If soldiers are in the middle of combat and they need to retreat or something, if a white soldier needs to make a choice between saving his fellow black soldier or his fellow white soldier, how would this critical race theory come into play? How would these soldiers who are put through these DEI training courses react differently in these situations? And I'm afraid to know what the answer would be. If an officer who's been trained in this critical race theory DEI training has to send troops to do a very dangerous mission, is he going to send white troops because the black troops have already suffered enough in American history or whatever? Is he going to protect white troops is he going to protect black troops and put white troops in extra danger because he was taught in critical race theory training that we need to rebalance the scales of history? These are questions that I'm a little bit afraid to know the answer to, but I still think need to be asked. Just try to imagine how these theories and how these ideas would play out on a battlefield. It's pretty terrifying.